Welcome to the Deconstructed Woman podcast, a podcast about breaking down barriers between women, exploring and sharing perspectives of each individual woman's experience, and discovering what we have in common and what makes us different. Hosted by Elisa Marie and Joji.
Welcome back to another episode of The Deconstructed Woman. Today I'm joined by Tara. She's been one of my co-hosts in the past, and I reached out to her when I saw an article in the Chicago Tribune on Easter Sunday, ironically enough, April 20th, about with the title, Teens Are Spilling Dark Thoughts to AI Chatbots. And so, of course, I had to reach out to my just recently passed teen listener and to run the horror of this story by her. So let's welcome Tara. Hey, Tara, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, thank you for having me back.
Yeah, so I can't, it's like watching an accident unfold in front of me. Like these conversations that I'm reading about in the newspaper and I see on different websites and like news articles, it's just like harder and harder to believe. But these stories have real people attached to them, whether it's because kids are killing themselves or parents are feeling threatened or they find that their kids are going into their own worlds and like leaving the family unit. You read the article that I sent to you. What did you think of it? What did you make of the conversations that they were bringing up?
I thought it was really interesting just because a lot of the stuff that we talk about when it comes to AI is just ethics, which is a blurry line anyways, I feel like a lot of the time, because not everyone's morals line up and ethics line up. So looking at like, oh, this chatbot is telling or like is super sexual with this child, but the child is like giving it those prompts. So it's kind of like, is this like a parental issue? Is it an AI issue? But AI has taken over so much at this point that most of it, I mean, if any child is online, any teenager, any minor is online, they're constantly exposed to AI. So there's a lot of blurry lines when it comes to like how do we keep children safe but still like entice adults, which is a weird way to put it, I feel like. But um a lot of like that content can be enticing to adults, and it's hard to find a safeguard between like minors getting a hold of that and adults who know the difference between AI and the real world getting a hold of that kind of stuff.
One of the things that you had said to me when I brought up this topic with you was that, it's really hard to distinguish between a person and an AI chatbot. And can you talk a little bit about that? Like, why is it so hard to tell? I've never knowingly been on a conversation with AI chatbot, so I don't really know. I mean, there's no obvious markers or anything like that that you can tell when you're conversing with somebody that is not real.
Yeah, so two big things for me. Definitely one of them I've brought up to you before, which is the like dead internet theory, where at some point AI will have taken over social media as an internet so much that you won't ever interact with another human because the AI to human ratio is so outnumbered, which is, I feel like, a big thing that we're currently seeing now. This was like a theory from a really long time ago, but it's a big thing that we're seeing now that AI has become such a big thing. And I think the other thing is AI is now so advanced and so real and has looked at so many things online and found all of these conversations that people were having and ways to emulate that. I feel like a lot of times when we think of AI, we still think of like the automated text messages you get from a company or an automated voice like robotic on the phone when you're setting up a doctor's appointment. But there is AIs out there now that will have full human conversations with you that pull from other humans' voices and can overlay. And they can pull from other humans' conversations and look through emails and be able to craft a response. And the more we interact with AI, the better they become at emulating humans. So a lot of like times, if you're interacting with an AI in the comment section without knowing that it was an AI that just spam commented that because someone set it up to make money, you're just telling it better ways to comment under these videos because they obviously are not human, so they can't come up with witty jokes off of a video. but the more they are able to emulate humans, the better they're getting. And so at this point, I don't know. I think that there is still a lot of markers, but for people who, especially the younger generation and the older generation, I think, are more susceptible to not knowing whether it's a human or not because of how good they've gotten and because we were always told to like watch out for these things online, but AI is not something that anyone really fully understands yet. So we can't give like the younger, older generation those markers to look for that because we don't know.
Yeah. And I guess, I'm pretty naive or inexperienced with this whole revolution of AI chat boxes because I mean, the only experience I have with these things are like if you go to a website and they say, oh, do you want to talk to our like a chat bot, right? To answer like the frequently asked questions. But that's really obvious. And they ask you about that. And then, usually if you ask basic questions, it'll respond to you. But then the more specific you get, then they usually just tell you to call customer service or something like that. And so what you're saying is that for the younger kids who are being involved with chat AIs, they're inadvertently training these AI chatbots to become more and more human-like and less robotic to the point where the children may not even realize what they're creating and how much influence and access that they are giving to these chat bots to become more and more similar to humans, which really they're not going to be able to tell the difference at some point.
Yeah. Cause like I know I'm pretty sure the most commonly used AI currently that like well, there's one that no one knows they're using, which is the Google AI that is now every time you search something up, AI pops up with a culmination of everything across the internet, which is horrible anyways, because you're getting like a Reddit post from 12 years ago, as well as a doctor's medical advice and kind of trying to average those out, which it dissuades people from doing real research, which is a whole other issue. But then you have Chat GPT, which is, you're interacting with AI. But even on that, I'm sure people have seen it where when you ask a question, it can now ask you, like, do you prefer this response or this response to try to tailor it to you specifically? So every time we give any sort of AI, any search, any question, anytime we ask something about the holiday today, they'll be able to get a demographic profile on who's celebrating this holiday. If you ask, how do I write this email? They're getting a demographic profile on emails, what kind of emails are being sent, how to format emails. If you're asking them to critique something you wrote, you just gave them a whole human written essay that they now can learn off of. How do I make myself more human? So then the next time they spit out an essay, it's more similar to what a human would have wrote.
Right.
So you're just constantly feeding it information every time you think that it's giving you information.
Right. And I guess the other side of that is that because I have used Chat GPT, and I was actually proud of myself because it's like, oh, you can create this efficiency by using, having like a lower level assistant do this work for you that you could save your time doing. But I guess from what you're saying, I'm also grooming this AI to know what it is that I'm looking for now when I ask every successive question. They're going to know like my preferences, how I like to write, if I'm continually feeding them that information. So I'm curating this AI to my preferences so that in the future it's going to do a better job responding in the way that I want to. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what it's doing. So if you ask it to critique this email for you, and you've given them like 3 or 4 of these emails, it now knows how you format your emails, what you like to end yours with, how you start emails, if you use exclamation points a lot, if you're more a serious tone. And then next time when you're like, "Can you write this email for me?" because it is efficient, it will then give you something that you would prefer because it has critiqued itself to fit your formatting. But
So
the double-edged sword to that is that, like you said, it's super efficient and it's going to be used in the future in most workplaces. So, like, you also have to know how to use that kind of stuff. So there's no really getting around feeding them all this information.
And I guess it ties back to our conversation about kids being susceptible to this and maybe the elderly population as well, because both populations could be targeted for being isolated or lonely. And so, one of the thoughts that I had as we were talking before we jumped on this podcast was so, like, what if you are an introverted, lonely child without a lot of friends, or you're an elderly person who is isolated because you're far away from friends or family, or you're in a nursing home or something like that, and you're looking for social connection. And these kinds of products could be come across your path and you innocently get involved with them while you're a child, whether you're a child or an older adult, and just craving some connection. But then you find yourself in a twisted kind of a relationship, whether they want to scam you, take advantage of you, get something from you. That's a really dark path that they could travel down.
Oh, yeah, 100%, especially because they're becoming so human. And I think because we've interacted as well through, like, text so often, sometimes it's easy to just, like, when you're getting human-like responses, for it to seem like you are talking to a human and you're getting that connection even if you're really not. And so it's being lonely makes you so vulnerable to things that it is so easy to fall into something like that where you're accidentally creating a real relationship that has meaning to you, but it's never gonna have meaning to them because they are just a computer. And I feel like that's psychologically damaging as well, to be in what is almost a one-sided relationship with this person because you have created a meaningful connection and they will never be able to. And I feel like that's also detrimental. And the fact that when a person is in a vulnerable state, especially when it comes to these chatbots that are being created for negative reasons, like scamming, trying to get minors to do things that they shouldn't be doing, things like that. When you're in a vulnerable space where you're lonely and that's their target audience, that's who they're trying to get at, it's really easy to be manipulated, especially if you believe that you have a meaningful connection with this. So I know we were talking about the article earlier and how there was a teenage boy who was told by this Game of Thrones character that they would join them in Game of Thrones pretty much, or that they should come to them. And he attempted to kill himself because of that.
He did
And
kill
I
him.
feel like that's a huge example of this being able to be manipulated because you're in such a vulnerable state, especially children, when you're in a formative stage where it's hard to already distinguish the difference between reality and a fantasy world. You're coming out of that. And this fantasy world is the realest one we've created so far. So it's hard to tell a difference before that, let alone now that we've created a real human like person to talk to these kids and manipulate them and tell them all of these things and confuse them enough that they will do things that they don't even know the consequence of.
And I don't even know. I was listening to a NPR podcast where it's talking about AI and the future of it. Cause, like you said before to me, like there's new information about AI every day. So, like, how could this not be a common topic that, because we've discussed this before, you and I, and on this podcast with Alyssa and me as well. But, like, they were talking about there's like the AI chat or like the more AI focused. And then there's like this general human AI as well, which is a different like segment of AI, which is really more about leveraging the learning and becoming more human like. And so you think about how that's already progressed so far already, and that we're now talking about, really intentionally creating AI chatbots to be more human or to do like really truly learning and being able to respond in a way that mimics human learning. But that, like right now, it's almost like the younger kids or the older adults may have a one sided relationship and yet they're getting into so much trouble. I can't even imagine what the level of trouble is going to be if there is this general human AI characteristics added to this one sided chatbot. Then what is it that makes us different as human beings? And how will anybody really be able to tell the difference? That's a significant upping the risk level, I feel like.
Yeah, I feel like this part has been debated for a while, just like it's the whole trolley issue, like what truly makes us human? What makes us, if we teach something to have the same complexity as we do, what is the line between what's human and what's not? And it definitely became a huge issue because now they're creating like robots that are programmed through AI. I don't know, there's a movie to me, it's very silly, but it's very real, called Megan. It's the little kid killer that gets programmed where, like, it realizes, like, the complexity of what it is and then starts killing because it's programmed to protect people. And so the real human emotion that comes with protecting people is a lot of time anger or fear, and that is expressed violently, so then she became violent kind of thing. And when it first came out, it was really a laughed at movie. It was kinda like, "This is crazy, this is never gonna happen." But the farther we get into AI and the more progressive, like, robots and AI are becoming, it's hard to draw the line between what we even consider human and not. Like, we can know something is made from AI, but if it acts like a human, talks like a human, walks like a human, what makes it different than us? And how do we decide what is positive and what is negative then, or how we limit AI once it becomes that far? And can we limit AI to make it not be able to be the same complexity of a human? I think is another issue that a lot of people are having because it's hard to cap AI because it's such a cool and new thing, especially in the tech world, that how do we make sure that there's safeguards in place or that these aren't AIs that are truly gaining consciousness? Because when you turn something into a human, it's a whole like spiral, but it's like, where do we cap it? Where do we stop it? How do we create something that doesn't make this a human so that we can tell the difference still and we can make sure that there's a line?
Yeah, I mean, I remember, like when I was in college and in my 30s, I think people would say, well, the computer is only as smart as the programmer who is programming it, right? And there was this assumption that the computer could not be smarter than the person who is giving it its code or its directives and things like that. I guess the question is that is there a point where AI will supersede that where there is no limit? And I'm sure like people like my husband, who's a software designer, is probably going to be like, oh, that seems far fetched or something. But I wonder if that really is, because he understands the technical aspects of it. And he might be able to say, there is a cap because of X, Y, and Z, which you and I don't know. But then I also think about your background and your area of study, which is neuroscience. And so this idea of like, I know that there are many I don't know, like the computer has been compared to a brain and the neurons and the connections and all of that. But when we're talking about human consciousness, that's a whole different thing. But then there have been lots of movies that are sci-fi that have talked about, different ways of accessing and connecting and getting robotic systems to have some of those characteristics. I mean, they're all sci-fi, but I think that it leads you to think about, well, could that happen? Simple things like the movie War Games, which is really dated today. You and I talked earlier this week about the movie Her and the amount of an adult man getting into a emotional relationship with a voice and what that did to, him and some of the choices that he made in response to that character, that female character. And so I think that it could go in a lot of different ways, but we're not talking about adults who are responsible for their choices. We're talking about young children. I mean, in this article, there was an autistic child who was getting some very negative like literature reviews by the AI bot that was talking about the violence that certain angry children did towards their parents that they were mad at, as one example. There was the parent who alleged that her daughter had become hypersexualized because there was an AI chat box that she thought was influencing her daughter's behavior in a more sexual fashion. And then there was the Florida child who you talked about that actually did commit suicide because he wanted to, go and be with this chat box that he designed to be like Daenerys, which is from the Game of Thrones. So, I mean, these are minor children who have all been caught up in this world of AI where they're not either mature enough, sophisticated enough, or something to be able to realize what is happening. So I don't know what the guardrails would look like. And then these articles also interviewed a lot of these AI companies who say, well, we do protect it, we do put things out there, but clearly it's not enough. And there's not enough warnings, or it's still being able to be manipulated. I mean, you're sort of in the throes of that. Do you believe that these companies are doing everything they can, or do they leave the door open enough where lots of things can happen if you wanted to go in that direction with no guardrails?
I think that there's definitely different levels to the safeguards. ChatGPT is run through a separate, independent company. I can't remember the name of them, but I am pretty sure as of my last checking of who runs it. And when it comes to that, I know there's a decent amount of safeguards where they won't talk to you in a romantic way. They won't talk to you in a derogatory way because it is mainly just used for informational stuff. But when it comes to making chatbots like on Instagram, the new Meta ones that you can design yourself and you can talk to, I think that while there is probably some safeguarding there, I don't think that they put as much as they could, because the whole point of these bots is to feel like you're talking to a human, and a human is going to respond to you in the way you continuously talk to them. So to make something like seem human, it's hard to put too many safeguards on there, especially because the problem with chatbots is they're not just trying to apply, like, to attract children, they're also trying to be applicable to adults. And so you can put safeguards on there so that there's specific things that can't be said, but it doesn't get rid of the whole, like, I read a bunch of articles that talked about children who are physically and emotionally abused killing their parents, and I feel bad for yours kind of thing. You can't really safeguard that, because if you safeguard that, then when they talk about how do you safeguard that I read all of these articles that were titled this, you can't really, when you're talking about children and adults using this, children who are getting on social medias that maybe they're not really allowed on or their parents don't know about because everything changes so fast. It's hard to put on full parental control at this point when it comes to social medias because of how many different things there are. So I feel like a lot of companies don't safeguard because they want it to be applicable to all of these different groups and these subgroups. And to do that, you can't throw a general one on there. And so to continue to get their AI to be used, they're not going to put the strongest safeguards that they can.
Yeah. And I was just thinking as you were talking, like, we expose young children to video games and, other things like that sort of create the behavior or the acceptance of that kind of interaction with games like that, which then isn't that far removed from an AI chat box. My grandson just went and saw the Minecraft movie, and he was just sort of thinking about, okay, if at 5 years old, we're taking them to a movie to see this, which is supposed to be sort of you know, yeah, a movie about Minecraft, but how normalizing is it for that interaction with whether it's imagery or whether it's with video games? I think it just, then we just keep escalating that relationship, how normal it is for having that interaction to the point where, why is it a reach for a kid to think that it's okay to have a relationship with and a chat bot, because it's just so much part of their context and their life experience from such a young age. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how do you, I mean, if you don't let your kids get exposed to this stuff, then they're going to be like an outcast with her schoolmates, their classmates. And so I don't know where that line is. I guess I'm just trying to figure out, like, how do you try to let your children have a normal experience without opening up this Pandora's box full of craziness that you lose control over very, very quickly?
Yeah, that's also, I think, an issue now too, in the fact that I think that in our society, I don't know about too many other countries, but in American society, I feel that there's a huge desensitization towards certain things. Like, when you see it's being exposed to something repeatedly, it's not a form of propaganda, but it's definitely a form of, like, desensitization. So watching all of these movies where AI is encouraged and all of the sci-fi being out there about these bots, and then hearing these crazy stories about oh, they're making a robot that can talk just like a human can. And then having AI be brought in, it wasn't a crazy jump from what we had already been seeing in these like sci-fi and these movies and things like that. So I think that there's the fact that a lot of people just don't understand the dangers of AI because we've seen it around for so long, or we assumed it was coming for so long. Because AI is so normalized now that it's going to be a huge thing in schools, it's gonna be a huge thing in the workplace. I know that some of my friends in college have already had assignments where they were asked to give a prompt to get a specific outcome through chat so that you know how to use it. Because AI is becoming such a prominent thing that it's gonna be used in colleges and the workforce in the future. It's efficient, it's good for business, so it's going to be implicated a lot of different or brought into a bunch of different places. And by not giving your child the exposure or your teen this exposure to AI, when they get to these areas, they're not gonna know what to do, and someone that does is going to be more well equipped to go into the workplace over them, even though a lot of times it's just parents trying to keep their children safe. So it's a hard line to draw because, again, AI changes so rapidly that a bot that had a safeguard one day could have got the safeguard undone or remade, or there's 12 different versions of it that your child found that they now are using. So it's gonna be hard to do anything when it comes to protecting kids from AI at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the tricky part that frustrates so many parents is that, the parents that are very involved with their kids, they are monitoring this kind of stuff. But Dan and I just watched a show called Adolescence, and it was a very powerful 4 episode miniseries that was out there that's getting a lot of buzz recently because of the topic, which is the same thing, not necessarily AI chatbots, but really the idea of how much exposure kids have to the internet or social media, throw in there, the evolution of that to AI chatbots and how much influence there is and what that can lead to and how parents are not involved with that at the level that they really should be or should be aware of. And so ultimately, this young person, ended up killing somebody because of not necessarily influence to do something, but just the amount of information they sought out about that and made some young person's assumptions and then went with the emotion behind it and then hurt, another person. And then the parents who are like, no, I mean, my kid is a good kid. I mean, he's in his room, he keeps to himself, and all the things that they're saying, which are all high risk behaviors, right? That most of us would be like, well, yeah, did you know what they were looking at up in their room? And they just assume that everything is fine because they're not out there, doing violence on the streets that they think of as violence. And yet then, the police are coming to arrest their kid and they have no idea how 2 and 2 ended up with this. And so, but I think that it's a very compelling story about some of the high risk factors. Parents really never know what's going on with their kids. Kids are never too young to start being influenced by social media and what's available out there in the wild, wild west of the internet. And the fact that a kid's job is in certain ways to not let their parents in on what they're doing if they want to be mischievous or, breaking some rules. I mean, kids are pretty sophisticated on breaking parents' rules. I mean, that's even if you're a good kid, you sort of know how to do that, right? And so I don't really know, but the show was really impressive in terms of laying out from everybody's perspective, the parents' perspective, the kid's perspective, the, law's perspective, and the psychiatrist's perspective who was interacting with this kid, and to be like, who is wrong here? Like, who's right? Like, everybody has a degree of truth in their perception of what happened, but yet we still ended up here. So what does that mean for us, right? And it just sort of left the door open for people to provoke a conversation, but it's not an easy one to have. I don't know if you've heard of this show, Adolescence, but you're busy in school, so you may not have. But do you understand what the intent of that show was?
Yeah, I have yet to see it. Sadly, I don't have many social medias anymore, so I get thrown behind when it comes to a lot of the trending shows and stuff. But I completely understand where the show is coming from, and I think that we're gonna start to see a lot of consequence from AI that no one knows how we got there. And I think that, not to go back to COVID, because I know that's kind of a dead horse at this point, but all of these kids who during COVID, especially their formative years, they're now teenagers, they were given internet access at a very early age because it was COVID. There wasn't really, parents didn't have much else for their kids to do. And so a lot of them turned to internet consumption, and now they're old enough for parents to maybe not have as much control over their socials and what they're seeing and what they're doing on their phones. And especially because it's just known as, oh, like, teenagers keep to themselves, they stay in their room, they're quiet. So they're not being checked in on as often. And I think that we're gonna see a lot of consequence from the things that the atrocities that can be committed through the internet now. There's a lot of things that you can do that you couldn't before that parents don't know about because they don't even know that it's possible, of kids creating violent tendencies from just being isolated, because that's what being isolated does. And I also think that we're going to see some consequence from people being isolated but believing that they're not, because they have these chatbots or because they have AI, but it still is doing the same damaging psychological effects of loneliness, because you really are truly still lonely, and not seeking out help because they don't think they need it anymore now that they have these chatbots. And also the reinforcement that these chatbots can give. They're not going to tell you you're wrong. So if you have violent tendencies, or if you are lonely, or you're looking for someone to console you, these chatbots are going to give you this validation, or tell you that you're right, or that you're not lonely, and these violent tendencies are normal and they're things that you should do. Um, and the consequence of that is going to be something that we shouldn't really take lightly, and I feel like we still are because we don't know the full effects yet.
Yeah, and we haven't even gotten into, and we probably won't on this call, about just the mental health makeup of what this can do, why you're susceptible, and sort of the aftermath of having to give up those some of these relationships, because it is like there's a withdrawal pattern, because now you don't know how to interact with anybody else who isn't, gratifying all the time, or making you feel like you're always going to be right, because that's what it sounds like, that's that relationship is constantly, reinforcing your conversation with the bot, because that's what his job is to make you feel, wanted and liked, and made to feel like you're part of this grouping. I guess one thing I'm thinking about as we sort of wrap up this conversation is, I know you're not anywhere near being a parent and you're a young person, but I guess for those listeners out there that have young kids, given your, ripe old age of 20 years old, what kind of parameters would you put in place if you were a parent? And I know you've got younger cousins and siblings and things like that. So, what are the high risk behaviors that you see that you would call to attention to parents that they may not be clued into, that you readily see out there with young kids, that makes you, just sort of raises an alarm for you?
Imparting all of my wisdom on this topic, I think I've read a couple of papers now, scientific papers, that are now looking at the effect of, like, isolation or lack of parental love and stuff like that on children, and the warning signs for that. And I feel like a lot of the warning signs are the ones that you they're hard to distinguish whether it's a warning sign or whether this is just your kid. But things like withdrawing from family, especially if they were very involved and they're friends with their family and they start withdrawing, spending a lot of time alone in a room, spending a lot of time on their phone, not wanting to interact with others, I feel like is probably the biggest hallmark of, they have found something else to interact with, and maybe it's not what you want them to be interacting with. And I am a big my mom used to do it to me. I would probably do it to my child. I think she still does it to my sister. Looking through phones up until the age of 18. Like, just going, not looking through, not trying to look at your private conversations with their friends, people they know, with other family members, but just taking a glance, making sure that there's nothing out of the ordinary, nothing they don't recognize, people that they're talking to that they don't recognize because the internet has been a dangerous place for longer than AI. It's just even more dangerous now. And I would definitely say educating yourself on the different types of AI, what AI usage looks like, what AI is doing, like staying up on those articles that are coming out through the Chicago Tribune, letting you know these are things that they saw in their children because it still is a very new thing. So I think that a lot of it is just going to be communicating and staying educated and making sure that you're doing the same things you were doing before.
I mean, it's so thank you so much for that, Tara. I was just sitting here and thinking about like as parents when my daughter was younger, like, there were all these warnings like don't use your TV as a babysitter and, interact with your child and, you're the most important person to them. And, those things haven't necessarily changed. It's just like, but when we as parents get busy and you're tired and you're trying to make dinner and your kid is watching TV or playing a game or on the phone or is being quiet and you just want 5 minutes to yourself, those things add up and you have to question yourself and you have to make sure that, you are seeking out your child because it just I guess with everything that's working against us, working parents, it feels like the more you let go of some of that control, the more difficult it is going to be. And there's no doubt that our kids are going to fight us tooth and nail. My kid was pretty normal and she wanted to be left alone a lot. And so it was something that you have to pick and choose your battles for what you allow and what you don't. But at some point, you have to know when that child reached that boundary. You know what I mean? Like they can't spend all night in their bedroom holed up where you see them maybe to eat and that's it. And they're not in sports, they're not working, they're not volunteering, they have no friends. And it's like out of sight, out of mind. I mean, that should be a pretty big warning to you that there's something going on because that's just not normal, right? There is a certain amount of angst that kids are supposed to have and all that kind of stuff. But I think we're not that different than when we were kids. I mean, there's just, you still have to respect your parents and interact like normal without letting them off the hook too much. And I guess that's the part that's really hard to decipher where's that line? But I think as parents, we sort of know. We override it sometimes and we shouldn't, but we all sort of know. And I think that's what I'm trying to get across to the parents. If you worry, then look into it.
Yeah. That's how, thankfully, I would say an open line of communication is the best thing that can be done there. And thankfully, I had that. So when it came to things like AI chatbots being new, it was like just a conversation that was had. By the way, this is a thing. How do you like, and then being able to educate others on the danger of what you are worried about is the most important part because if you can't communicate why you're worrying, then they won't understand and they won't care as much. So, or they'll think that you're pushing this boundary on them for no reason. So don't just be like, oh, don't talk to AI and leave it at that. I would also be like, this is why it's dangerous. This is what it's doing. This is what I'm trying to protect you from. This is why I'm worried, kind of thing, is usually the key to them being like, oh, okay, so this is why I shouldn't do it instead of just, I'm not allowed to.
Yeah. And also, I think starting that conversation at a young age so that kids know that there's limits to, just like we used to set limits on TV watching, there should be a limit on video games and social media and all of that. And just because they have a phone doesn't mean they have unlimited access to their phone. I mean, especially if a kid is 8 years old or 10 years old or even 14 years old. Obviously, as they get closer to 17, 18 years old, that's a different story. But for a parent to think they can't control their children's exposure to a cell phone in given today's environment makes me feel like, no, this is like a new precaution that we as parents have to take. And I hear
Yeah.
you as a person saying, yeah, that's an important thing to do. Like, don't give up that power that you have as parents because you're opening a dangerous door that has no limitations on it at all.
Yes. Yeah,
Well,
I know at the age of 16, I was still getting screen time set on my phone, so
yeah, and I will say, I mean, every time I talk to you, I get scareder and scareder about like everything that's going on.
yes.
But I think it's important to be real about what's happening. I mean, we can't live in our own fantasy world because we know what it's like when some people do live in the fantasy worlds that some of these kids have found. And it's really, really scary because it is real and it can happen to anybody if you're just susceptible enough. And there's a lot more people like that out there than we think. So, once again, thank you for making the last, so many minutes fly by because it was really interesting and thought provoking and scary, all in the same ball of wax. But thank you so much for being willing to talk to me, being away at school as your term is coming to a close. I really appreciate you taking the time to let me pick your brain on this controversial sort of subject.
Thank you. I enjoy talking about it. I have been really into the AI commentary YouTubers and all that stuff recently because it's changing so fast. So I think it's a really fun topic to talk about.
Good. I'll have to have you keep us on point as things change. And if I miss it, you'll have to reach out to me and tell me.
Yeah, of course.
Will do. Okay. Well, I'll talk to you later. Thanks so much again. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to our podcast, The Deconstructed Woman. If you liked this podcast, please share it with your friends, rate this episode, or subscribe to be notified of all new content. We want to hear from you, our listener. Do you have thoughts on the discussions we're having? Want to share topic suggestions? Or want to join us for a topic that you're passionate about? Contact us at our email address, thedeconstructedwoman@gmail.com.